Welcome to Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden, one of the most influential classics in the history of self-help and success literature. In these chapters, Marden shares timeless wisdom on ambition, persistence, leadership, and achievement. His words inspire us to overcome hesitation, strengthen our will, and move boldly toward our highest potential. Whether you're seeking personal growth, practical success strategies, or simply daily motivation, this series will encourage and guide you on your journey forward.
Chapter 38. The Will and the Way. I will find a way or make one. Nothing is impossible to the man who can will. Mirabeau. The iron will of one stout heart shall make 1,000 quail. A feeble dwarf, dauntlessly resolved, will turn the tide of battle, and rally to a nobler strife the giants that had fled. Tupper. In the lexicon of youth, which fate reserves for a bright manhood, there is no such word as fail. Bulwer. When a firm and decisive spirit is recognized, it is curious to see how the space clears around a man and leaves him room and freedom. John Foster. As well can the Prince of Orange pluck the stars from the sky, as bring the ocean to the wall of Leyden for your relief, was the derisive shout of the Spanish soldiers when told that the Dutch fleet would raise that terrible 4-month siege of 1574. But from the parched lips of William, tossing on his bed of fever at Rotterdam, had issued the command, "Break down the dikes, give Holland back to ocean." And the people had replied, "Better a drowned land than a lost land." They began to demolish dike after dike of the strong lines, ranged one within another for 15 miles to their city of the interior. It was an enormous task. The garrison was starving, and the besiegers laughed in scorn at the slow progress of the puny insects who sought to rule the waves of the sea. But ever, as of old, heaven aids those who help themselves. On the 1st and 2nd of October, a violent equinoctial gale rolled the ocean inland and swept the fleet on the rising waters almost to the camp of the Spaniards. The next morning the garrison sailed out to attack their enemies, but the besiegers had fled in terror under cover of the darkness. The next day the wind changed, and a counter-tempest brushed the water, with the fleet upon it, from the surface of Holland. The outer dikes were replaced at once, leaving the North Sea within its old bounds. When the flowers bloomed the following spring, a joyous procession marched through the streets to found the University of Leyden in commemoration of the wonderful deliverance of the city. At a dinner party given in 1837 at the residence of Chancellor Kent in New York City, some of the most distinguished men in the country were invited, and among them was a young and rather melancholy and reticent Frenchman. Professor Morse was also one of the guests, and during the evening he drew the attention of Mr. Gallatin, then a prominent statesman, to the stranger, observing that his forehead indicated a great intellect. "Yes," replied Mr. Gallatin, touching his own forehead with his finger, "there is a great deal in that head of his, but he has a strange fancy. Can you believe it? He has the idea that he will one day be the Emperor of France. Can you conceive anything more absurd than that?" It did seem absurd, for this reserved Frenchman was then a poor adventurer, an exile from his country, without fortune or powerful connections. And yet, 14 years later, his idea became a fact. His dream of becoming Napoleon III was realized. True, before he accomplished his purpose there were long, dreary years of imprisonment, exile, disaster, and patient labor and hope. but he gained his ambition at last. He was not scrupulous as to the means employed to accomplish his ends, and yet he is a remarkable example of what pluck and energy can do. When Mr. Ingram, publisher of the Illustrated London News, began life as a news dealer at Nottingham, England, he walked 10 miles to deliver a single paper rather than disappoint a customer. Does anyone wonder that such a youth succeeded? Once he rose at 2 o'clock in the morning and walked to London to get some papers because there was no post to bring them. He determined that his customers should not be disappointed. This is the kind of will that finds a way. There is scarcely anything in all biography grander than the saying of young Henry Fawcett, Gladstone's last Postmaster General, to his grief-stricken father, who had put out both his eyes by birdshot during a game hunt. "Never mind, father, blindness shall not interfere with my success in life." One of the most pathetic sights in London streets, long afterward, was Henry Fawcett, MP, led everywhere by a faithful daughter, who acted as amanuensis as well as guide to her plucky father. Think of a young man, scarcely on the threshold of active life, suddenly losing the sight of both eyes, and yet, by mere pluck and almost incomprehensible tenacity of purpose, lifting himself into eminence in any direction, to say nothing of becoming one of the foremost men in a country noted for its great men. The courageous daughter who was eyes to her father was a marvelous example of pluck and determination. For the first time in the history of Oxford College, which reaches back centuries, she succeeded in winning the post which had only been gained before by great men, such as Gladstone, the post of senior wrangler. This achievement had had no parallel in history up to that date, and attracted the attention of the whole civilized world. Not only had no woman ever held this position before, but with few exceptions, it had only been held by men who in afterlife became highly distinguished. "Circumstances," says Milton, "have rarely favored famous men. They have fought their way to triumph through all sorts of opposing obstacles. The true way to conquer circumstances is to be a greater circumstance yourself." Yet, while desiring to impress in the most forcible manner possible the fact that willpower is necessary to success, and that, other things being equal, the greater the willpower, the grander and more complete the success, we cannot endorse the theory that there is nothing in circumstances or environments, or that any man, simply because he has an indomitable will, may become a Bonaparte, a Pitt, a Webster, a Beecher, a Lincoln. We must temper determination with discretion, and support it with knowledge and common sense, or it will only lead us to run our heads against posts. We must not expect to overcome a stubborn fact merely by a stubborn will. We only have the right to assume that we can do anything within the limit of our utmost faculty, strength, and endurance. Obstacles permanently insurmountable bar our progress in some directions, but in any direction we may reasonably hope and attempt to go, we shall find that, as a rule, they are either not insurmountable or else not permanent. The strong-willed, intelligent, persistent man will find or make a way where, in the nature of things, a way cannot be found or made. Every schoolboy knows that circumstances do give clients to lawyers and patients to physicians, place ordinary clergymen in extraordinary pulpits, place sons of the rich at the head of immense corporations and large houses, when they have very ordinary ability and scarcely any experience, while poor young men with unusual ability, good education, good character, and large experience often have to fight their way for years to obtain even very mediocre situations. that there are thousands of young men of superior ability, both in the city and in the country, who seem to be compelled by circumstances to remain in very ordinary positions for small pay, when others about them are raised by money or family influence into desirable places. In other words, we all know that the best men do not always get the best places. Circumstances do have a great deal to do with our position, our salaries, our station in life. Everyone knows not always a way where there is a will, that labour does not always conquer all things, that there are things impossible even to him that wills, however strongly, that one cannot always make anything of himself he chooses, that there are limitations in our very natures which no amount of willpower or industry can overcome. But while it is true that the willpower cannot perform miracles, yet that it is almost omnipotent and can perform wonders, all history goes to prove. As Shakespeare says, "Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." Show me a man who, according to popular prejudice, is a victim of bad luck, and I will show you one who has some unfortunate crooked twist of temperament that invites disaster. He is ill-tempered, conceited, or trifling, lacks character, enthusiasm, or some other requisite for success. Disraeli said that man is not the creature of circumstances, but that circumstances are the creatures of men. Believe in the power of will, which annihilates the sickly, sentimental doctrine of fatalism. You must, but can't. You ought, but it is impossible. Give me the man who faces what he must, who breaks his birth's invidious bar, and grasps the skirts of happy chance, and breasts the blows of circumstance, and grapples with his evil star. The indomitable will, the inflexible purpose, will find a way or make one. There is always room for a man of force. He who has a firm will, says Goethe, moulds the world to himself. People do not lack strength, says Victor Hugo. They lack will. He who resolves upon any great end, by that very resolution has scaled the great barriers to it. And he who seizes the grand idea of self-cultivation and solemnly resolves upon it, will find that idea, that resolution, burning like fire within him, and ever putting him upon his own improvement. He will find it removing difficulties, searching out or making means, giving courage for despondency and strength for weakness. Nearly all great men, those who have towered high above their fellows, have been remarkable above all things else for their energy of will. Of Julius Caesar it was said by a contemporary that it was his activity and giant determination, rather than his military skill, that won his victories. The youth who starts out in life determined to make the most of his eyes and let nothing escape him which he can possibly use for his own advancement, who keeps his ears open for every sound that can help him on his way, who keeps his hands open that he may clutch every opportunity, who is ever on the alert for everything which can help him to get on in the world, who seizes every experience in life and grinds it up into paint for his great life's picture, who keeps his heart open that he may catch every noble impulse and everything which may inspire him, that youth will be sure to make his life successful. There are no ifs or ands about it. If he has his health, nothing can keep him from final success. No tyranny of circumstances can permanently imprison a determined will. The world always stands aside for the determined man. The general of a large army may be defeated, says Confucius, but you cannot defeat the determined mind of a peasant. The poor deaf pauper, Kitto, who made shoes in the almshouse, and who became the greatest of biblical scholars, wrote in his journal on the threshold of manhood, "I am not myself a believer in impossibilities. I think that all the fine stories about natural ability, etc., are mere rigmarole, and that every man may, according to his opportunities and industry, render himself almost anything he wishes to become." Lincoln is probably the most remarkable example on the pages of history, showing the possibilities of our country, from the poverty in which he was born, through the rowdyism of a frontier town, the discouragement of early bankruptcy, and the fluctuations of popular politics. He rose to the championship of union and freedom. Lincoln's will made his way. When his friends nominated him as a candidate for the legislature, his enemies made fun of him. When making his campaign speeches, he wore a mixed jean coat so short that he could not sit down on it, flax and tow linen trousers, straw hat, and pot metal boots. He had nothing in the world but character and friends. When his friends suggested law to him, he laughed at the idea of his being a lawyer. He said he had not brains enough. He read law barefoot under the trees, his neighbors said, and he sometimes slept on the counter in the store where he worked. He had to borrow money to buy a suit of clothes to make a respectable appearance in the legislature, and walked to take his seat at Vandalia, 100 miles. See Thurlow Weed, defying poverty and wading through the snow 2 miles with rags for shoes, to borrow a book to read before the sap bushfire. See Locke, living on bread and water in a Dutch garret. See Hayne, sleeping many a night on a barn floor with only a book for his pillow. See Samuel Drew, tightening his apron string in lieu of a dinner. History is full of such examples. He who will pay the price for victory need never fear final defeat. Paris was in the hands of a mob. The authorities were panic-stricken, for they did not dare to trust their underlings. In came a man who said, "I know a young officer who has the courage and ability to quell this mob." "Send for him, send for him, send for him," said they. Napoleon was sent for, came, subjugated the mob, subjugated the authorities, ruled France, and then conquered Europe. Success in life is dependent largely upon the willpower, and whatever weakens or impairs it diminishes success. The will can be educated. That which most easily becomes a habit in us is the will. Learn, then, to will decisively and strongly. Thus fix your floating life, and leave it no longer to be carried hither and thither like a withered leaf by every wind that blows. It is not talent that men lack. It is the will to labor. It is the purpose. It was the insatiable thirst for knowledge which held to his task, through poverty and discouragement. John Leyden, a Scotch shepherd's son. Barefoot and alone, he walked 6 or 8 miles daily to learn to read, which was all the schooling he had. His desire for an education defied the extremest poverty, and no obstacle could turn him from his purpose. He was rich when he discovered a little bookstore, and his thirsty soul would drink in the precious treasures from its priceless volumes for hours, perfectly oblivious of the scanty meal of bread and water which awaited him at his lowly lodging. Nothing could discourage him from trying to improve himself by study. It seemed to him that an opportunity to get at books and lectures was all that any man could need. Before he was 19, This poor shepherd boy with no chance had astonished the professors of Edinburgh by his knowledge of Greek and Latin. Hearing that a surgeon's assistant in the civil service was wanted, although he knew nothing whatever of medicine, he determined to apply for it. There were only 6 months before the place was to be filled, but nothing would daunt him, and he took his degree with honor. Walter Scott, who thought this one of the most remarkable illustrations of perseverance, helped to fit him out, and he sailed for India. Webster was very poor even after he entered Dartmouth College. A friend sent him a recipe for greasing his boots. Webster wrote and thanked him, and added, "But my boots needs other doctoring, for they not only admit water, but even peas and gravel stones." Yet he became one of the greatest men in the world. Sidney Smith said, "Webster was a living lie, because no man on earth could be as great as he looked." Carlyle said of him, "One would incline at sight to back him against the world." What seemed to be luck followed Stephen Girard all his life. No matter what he did, it always seemed to others to turn to his account. Being a foreigner, unable to speak English, short, stout, and with a repulsive face, blind in one eye, it was hard for him to get a start. But he was not the man to give up. He had begun as a cabin boy at 13, and for 9 years sailed between Bordeaux and the French West Indies. He improved every leisure minute at sea, mastering the art of navigation. At the age of 8, he had first discovered that he was blind in one eye. His father, evidently, thinking that he would never amount to anything, would not help him to an education beyond that of mere reading and writing, but sent his younger brothers to college. The discovery of his blindness, the neglect of his father, and the chagrin of his brother's advancement soured his whole life. When he began business for himself in Philadelphia, there seemed to be nothing he would not do for money. He bought and sold anything, from groceries to old junk. He bottled wine and cider, from which he made a good profit. Everything he touched prospered. He left nothing to chance. His plans and schemes were worked out with mathematical care. His letters written to his captains in foreign ports, laying out their routes and giving detailed instructions, are models of foresight and systematic planning. He never left anything of importance to others. He was rigidly accurate in his instructions, and would not allow the slightest departure from them. He used to say that while his captains might save him money by deviating from instructions once, yet they would cause loss in 99 other cases. He never lost a ship, and many times that which brought financial ruin to many others, as the War of 1812, only increased his wealth. Everybody, especially his jealous brother merchants, attributed his great success to his luck, while undoubtedly he was fortunate in happening to be at the right place at the right time. Yet he was precision, method, accuracy, energy itself. What seemed luck with him was only good judgment and promptness in seizing opportunities, and the greatest care and zeal in improving them to their utmost possibilities. The mathematician tells you that if you throw the dice, there are 30 chances to 1 against your turning up a particular number, and 100 to 1 against your repeating the same throw 3 times in succession, and so on in an augmenting ratio. Many a young man who has read the story of John Wanamaker's romantic career has gained very little inspiration or help from it toward his own elevation and advancement, for he looks upon it as the result of good luck, chance, or fate. "What a lucky fellow," he says to himself as he reads. "What a bonanza he fell into." But a careful analysis of Wanamaker's life only enforces the same lesson taught by the analysis of most great lives, namely, that a good mother, a good constitution, the habit of hard work, indomitable energy, determination which knows no defeat, decision which never wavers, concentration which never scatters its forces, courage which never falters, self-mastery which can say no and stick to it, strict integrity and downright honesty, a cheerful disposition, unbounded enthusiasm in one's calling, and a high aim and noble purpose ensure a very large measure of success. Youth should be taught that there is something in circumstances, that there is such a thing as a poor pedestrian happening to find no obstruction in his way, and reaching the goal when a better walker finds the drawbridge up, the street blockaded, and so fails to win the race. That wealth often does place unworthy sons in high positions, that family influence does gain a lawyer clients, a physician patients, an ordinary scholar a good professorship, but that, on the other hand, position, clients, patients, professorships, managers, and superintendents' positions do not necessarily constitute success. He should be taught that in the long run, as a rule, the best man does win the best place, and that persistent merit does succeed. There is about as much chance of idleness and incapacity winning real success or a high position in life as there would be in producing a paradise lost by shaking up promiscuously the separate words of Webster's dictionary and letting them fall at random on the floor. Fortune smiles upon those who roll up their sleeves and put their shoulders to the wheel, upon men who are not afraid of dreary, dry, irksome drudgery, men of nerve and grit, who do not turn aside for dirt and detail. The youth should be taught that he alone is great who, by a life heroic, conquers fate, that diligence is the mother of good luck, that 9 times out of 10 what we call luck or fate is but a mere bugbear of the indolent, the languid, the purposeless, the careless, the indifferent, that, as a rule, the man who fails does not see or seize his opportunity. Opportunity is coy, is swift, is gone, before the slow, the unobservant, the indolent, or the careless can seize her. In idle wishes fools supinely stay, so there a will and wisdom finds a way. It has been well said that the very reputation of being strong-willed, plucky, and indefatigable is of priceless value. It often cows enemies and dispels at the start opposition to one's undertakings, which would otherwise be formidable. It is astonishing what men who have come to their senses late in life have accomplished by a sudden resolution. Arkwright was 50 years of age when he began to learn English grammar and improve his writing and spelling. Benjamin Franklin was past 50 before he began the study of science and philosophy. Milton, in his blindness, was past the age of 50 when he sat down to complete his world-known epic, and Scott, at 55, took up his pen to redeem a liability of $600,000. "Yet I am learning," said Michelangelo, when 70 years and 10 were past, and he had long attained the highest triumphs of his art. Even brains are second in importance to will. The vacillating man is always pushed aside in the race of life. It is only the weak and vacillating who halt before adverse circumstances and obstacles. A man with an iron will, with a determination that nothing shall check his career, is sure, if he has perseverance and grit, to succeed. We may not find time for what we would like, but what we long for and strive for with all our strength, we usually approximate, if we do not fully reach. I wish it were possible to show the youth of America the great part that the will might play in their success in life, and in their happiness as well. The achievements of willpower are simply beyond computation. Scarcely anything in reason seems impossible to the man who can will strong enough and long enough. How often we see this illustrated in the case of a young woman who suddenly becomes conscious that she is plain and unattractive, who by prodigious exercise of her will and untiring industry resolves to redeem herself from obscurity and commonness, and who not only makes up for her deficiencies, but elevates herself into a prominence and importance which mere personal attractions could never have given her. Charlotte Cushman, without a charm of form or face, climbed to the very top of her profession. How many young men, stung by consciousness of physical deformity or mental deficiencies, have, by a strong, persistent exercise of willpower, raised themselves from mediocrity and placed themselves high above those who scorned them. History is full of examples of men and women who have redeemed themselves from disgrace, poverty, and misfortune by the firm resolution of an iron will, the consciousness of being looked upon as inferior, as incapable of accomplishing what others accomplish, the sensitiveness at being considered a dunce in school, has stung many a youth into a determination which has elevated him far above those who laughed at him, as in the case of Newton, of Adam Clark, of Sheridan, Wellington, Goldsmith, Dr. Chalmers, Curran, Disraeli, and hundreds of others. It is men like Mirabeau who trample upon impossibilities, like Napoleon, who do not wait for opportunities but make them, like Grant, who has only unconditional surrender for the enemy, who change the very front of the world. "I can't. It is impossible," said a foiled lieutenant to Alexander. "Begone!" shouted the conquering Macedonian. "There is nothing impossible to him who will try." Were I called upon to express in a word the secret of so many failures among those who started out in life with high hopes, I should say unhesitatingly they lacked willpower. They could not half will. What is a man without a will? He is like an engine without steam, a mere sport of chance, to be tossed about hither and thither, always at the mercy of those who have wills. I should call the strength of will the test of a young man's possibilities. Can he will strong enough and hold whatever he undertakes with an iron grip? It is the iron grip that takes the strong hold on life. "The truest wisdom," said Napoleon, "is a resolute determination." An iron will without principle might produce a Napoleon, but with character it would make a Wellington or a Grant, untarnished by ambition or avarice. The undivided will, 'tis that compels the elements and wrings a human music from the indifferent air. End of chapter 38. The Will and the Way.
If you enjoy timeless wisdom like this, consider subscribing for more audiobooks just like it.
Chapter 39. One Unwavering Aim. Life is an arrow, therefore you must know what mark to aim at, how to use the bow. Then draw it to the head and let it go. Henry Van Dyke. The important thing in life is to have a great aim and to possess the aptitude and perseverance to attain it. Goethe. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Let everyone ascertain his special business and calling, and then stick to it if he would be successful. Franklin. Why do you lead such a solitary life? Asked a friend of Michelangelo. Art is a jealous mistress, replied the artist. She requires the whole man. During his labours at the Sistine Chapel, according to Disraeli, he refused to meet anyone, even at his own house. This day we sailed westward, which was our course, were the simple but grand words which Columbus wrote in his journal day after day. Hope might rise and fall. Terror and dismay might seize upon the crew at the mysterious variations of the compass. But Columbus, unappalled, pushed due west and nightly added to his record the above words. Cut an inch deeper, said a member of the old guard to the surgeon probing his wound, and you will find the emperor, meaning his heart. By the marvellous power of concentrated purpose, Napoleon had left his name on the very stones of the Capitol, had burned it indelibly into the heart of every Frenchman, and had left it written in living letters all over Europe. France today has not shaken off the spell of that name. In the fair city on the Seine, the mystic N confronts you everywhere. Oh, the power of a great purpose to work miracles! It has changed the face of the world. Napoleon knew that there were plenty of great men in France, but they did not know the might of the unwavering aim by which he was changing the destinies of Europe. He saw that what was called the balance of power was only an idle dream, that, unless some mastermind could be found which was a match for events, the millions would rule in anarchy. His iron will grasped the situation, and, like William Pitt, he did not loiter around balancing the probabilities of failure or success, or daily with his purpose. There was no turning to the right nor to the left, no dreaming away time, nor building air castles, but one look and purpose, forward, upward, and onward, straight to his goal. His great success in war was due largely to his definiteness of aim. He always hit the bullseye. He was like a great burning glass, concentrating the rays of the sun upon a single spot. He burned a hole wherever he went. After finding the weak place in the enemy's ranks, he would mass his men and hurl them like an avalanche upon the critical point, crowding volley upon volley, charge upon charge, till he made a breach. What a lesson of the power concentration there is in this man's life! To succeed today, a man must concentrate all the faculties of his mind upon one unwavering aim, and have a tenacity of purpose which means death or victory. Every other inclination which tempts him from his aim must be suppressed. A man may starve on a dozen half-learned trades or occupations. He may grow rich and famous upon one trade thoroughly mastered, even though it be the humblest. Even Gladstone, with his ponderous yet active brain, said he could not do two things at once. He threw his entire strength upon whatever he did. The intensest energy characterized everything he undertook, even his recreation. If such concentration of energy is necessary for the success of a Gladstone, what can we common mortals hope to accomplish by scatteration? All great men have been noted for their power of concentration which makes them oblivious of everything outside their aim. Victor Hugo wrote his Notre Dame during the Revolution of 1830, while the bullets were whistling across his garden. He shut himself up in one room, locked his clothes up in another, lest they should tempt him to go out into the street, and spent most of that winter wrapped in a big grey comforter, pouring his very life into his work. Abraham Lincoln possessed such power of concentration that he could repeat quite correctly a sermon to which he had listened in his boyhood. A New York sportsman, in answer to an advertisement, sent 25 cents for a sure receipt to prevent a shotgun from scattering, and received the following: "Dear Sir, to keep a gun from scattering, put in but a single shot." It is the men who do one thing in this world who come to the front. Who is the favourite actor? It is a Jefferson, who devotes a lifetime to a Rip Van Winkle, a Booth, an Irving, a Keane, who plays one character until he can play it better than any other man living, and not the shallow players who impersonate all parts. The great man is the one who never steps outside of his specialty, or dissipates his individuality. It is an Edison, a Morse, a Bell, a Howe, a Stevenson, a Watt. It is an Adam Smith, spending 10 years on The Wealth of Nations. It is a Gibbon, giving 20 years to his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It is a Hume, writing 13 hours a day on his History of England. It is a Webster, spending 36 years on his dictionary. It is a Bancroft, working 26 years on his History of the United States. It is a Field, crossing the ocean 50 times to lay a cable, while the world ridicules. It is a Newton, writing his Chronology of Ancient Nations 16 times. A one-talent man who decides upon a definite object accomplishes more than a 10-talent man who scatters his energies and never knows exactly what he will do. The weakest living creature, by concentrating his powers upon one thing, can accomplish something. The strongest, by dispersing his over many, may fail to accomplish anything. A great purpose is cumulative, and, like a great magnet, it attracts all that is kindred along the stream of life. A Yankee can splice a rope in many different ways. An English sailor only knows one way, but that is the best one. It is the one-sided man, the sharp-eyed man, the man of single and intense purpose, the man of one idea, who cuts his way through obstacles and forges to the front. The time has gone forever when a Bacon can span universal knowledge, or when, absorbing all the knowledge of the times, a Dante can sustain arguments against 14 disputants in the University of Paris, and conquer in them all. The day when a man can successfully drive a dozen callings abreast is a thing of the past. Concentration is the keynote of the century. Scientists estimate that there is energy enough in less than 50 acres of sunshine to run all the machinery in the world if it could be concentrated. But the sun might blaze out upon the earth forever without setting anything on fire, although these rays focused by a burning glass would melt solid granite or even change a diamond into vapor. There are plenty of men who have ability enough. The rays of their faculties, taken separately, are all right, but they are powerless to collect them, to bring them all to bear upon a single spot. Versatile men, universal geniuses, are usually weak because they have no power to concentrate their talents upon one point, and this makes all the difference between success and failure. Chiselled upon the tomb of a disappointed, heartbroken king, Joseph II of Austria, in the Royal Cemetery of Vienna, a traveller tells us, is this epitaph: "Here lies a monarch who, with the best of intentions, never carried out a single plan." Sir James Mackintosh was a man of remarkable ability. He excited in everyone who knew him the greatest expectations. Many watched his career with much interest, expecting that he would dazzle the world, but there was no purpose in his life. He had intermittent attacks of enthusiasm for doing great things, but his zeal all evaporated before he could decide what to do. This fatal defect in his character kept him balancing between conflicting motives, and his whole life was almost thrown away. He lacked power to choose one object and persevere with a single aim, sacrificing every interfering inclination. He, for instance, vacillated for weeks, trying to determine whether to use usefulness or utility in a composition. One talent utilized in a single direction will do infinitely more than 10 talents scattered. A thimbleful of powder behind a ball in a rifle will do more execution than a carload of powder unconfined. The rifle barrel is the purpose that gives direct aim to the powder, which otherwise, no matter how good it might be, would be powerless. The poorest scholar in school or college, often in practical life, far outstrips the class leader or senior wrangler, simply because what little ability he has he employs for a definite object, while the other, depending upon his general ability and brilliant prospects, never concentrates his powers. It is fashionable to ridicule the man of one idea, but the men who have changed the front of the world would have been men of a single aim. No man can make his mark on this age of specialties who is not a man of one idea, one supreme air, one master passion, the man who would make himself felt on this bustling planet, who would make a breach in the compact conservatism of our civilization, must play all his guns on one point. A wavering aim, a faltering purpose, has no place in the 20th century. Mental shiftlessness is the cause of many a failure. The world is full of unsuccessful men who spend their lives letting empty buckets down into empty wells. "Mr. A often laughs at me," said a young American chemist, "because I have but one idea. He talks about everything, aims to excel in many things, but I have learned that, if I ever wish to make a breach, I must play my guns continually upon one point." This great chemist, when an obscure schoolmaster, used to study by the light of a pine knot in a log cabin. Not many years later he was performing experiments in electromagnetism before English earls, and subsequently he was at the head of one of the largest scientific institutes of this country. He was the late Professor Henry of the Smithsonian Institution, Washington. "We should guard against a talent which we cannot hope to practice in perfection," says Goethe. "Improve it as we may, we shall always, in the end, when the merit of the matter has become apparent to us, painfully lament the loss of time and strength devoted to such botching." An old proverb says, "The master of one trade will support the wife and 7 children, and the master of 7 will not support himself." It is the single aim that wins. Men with monopolizing ambitions rarely live in history. They do not focus their powers long enough to burn their names indelibly into the roll of honor. Edward Everett, even with his magnificent powers, disappointed the expectations of his friends. He spread himself over the whole field of knowledge and elegant culture, but the mention of the name of Everett does not call up any one great achievement, as does that of names like Garrison and Phillips. Voltaire called the Frenchman La Harpe an oven which was always heating, but which never cooked anything. Hartley Coleridge was splendidly endowed with talent, but there was one fatal lack in his character. He had no definite purpose, and his life was a failure. Unstable as water, he could not excel. Southey, the uncle of Coleridge, says of him, "Coleridge has two left hands. He was so morbidly shy from living alone in his dreamland that he could not open a letter without trembling. He would often rally from his purposeless life and resolve to redeem himself from the oblivion he saw staring him in the face. But, like Sir James Mackintosh, he remained a man of promise merely to the end of his life." The man who succeeds has a program. He fires his course and adheres to it. He lays his plans and executes them. He goes straight to his goal. He is not pushed this way and that every time a difficulty is thrown in his path. If he cannot get over it, he goes through it. Constant and steady use of the faculties under a central purpose gives strength and power, while the use of faculties without an aim or end only weakens them. The mind must be focused on a definite end, or, like machinery without a balance wheel, it will rack itself to pieces. This age of concentration calls not for educated men merely, not for talented men, not for geniuses, not for jacks of all trades, but for men who are trained to do one thing as well as it can be done. Napoleon could go through the drill of his soldiers better than any one of his men. Stick to your aim. The constant changing of one's occupation is fatal to all success. After a young man has spent 5 or 6 years in a dry goods store, he concludes that he would rather sell groceries, thereby throwing away 5 years of valuable experience, which will be of very little use to him in the grocery business. And so he spends a large part of his life drifting around from one kind of employment to another, learning part of each, but all of none, forgetting that experience is worth more to him than money, and that the years devoted to learning his trade or occupation are the most valuable. Half-learned trades, no matter if a man has 20, will never give him a good living, much less a competency, while wealth is absolutely out of the question. How many young men fail to reach the point of efficiency in one line of work before they get discouraged and venture into something else? How easy to see the thorns in one's own profession or vocation, and only the roses in that of another. A young man in business, for instance, seeing a physician riding about town in his carriage, visiting his patients, imagines that a doctor must have an easy, ideal life, and wonders that he himself should have embarked in an occupation so full of disagreeable drudgery and hardships. He does not know of the years of dry, tedious study which the physician has consumed, the months and perhaps years of waiting for patients, the dry detail of anatomy, the endless names of drugs and technical terms. There is a sense of great power in a vocation after a man has reached the point of efficiency in it, the point of productiveness, the point where his skill begins to tell and brings in returns. Up to this point of efficiency, while he is learning his trade, the time seems to have been almost thrown away. But he has been storing up a vast reserve of knowledge of detail, laying foundations, forming his acquaintances, gaining his reputation for truthfulness, trustworthiness, and integrity, and in establishing his credit. When he reaches this point of efficiency, all the knowledge and skill, character, influence, and credit thus gained come to his aid, and he soon finds that in what seemed almost thrown away lies the secret of his prosperity. the credit he established as a clerk, the confidence, the integrity, the friendships formed, he finds equal to a large capital when he starts out for himself and takes the highway to fortune, while the young man who half learned several trades got discouraged and stopped just short of the point of efficiency, just this side of success, is a failure because he didn't go far enough. He did not press on to the point at which his acquisition would have been profitable. In spite of the fact that nearly all very successful men have made a life work of one thing, we see on every hand hundreds of young men and women flitting about from occupation to occupation, trade to trade, in one thing today and another tomorrow, just as though they could go from one thing to another by turning a switch, as though they could run as well on another track as onto the one they have left, regardless of the fact that no two careers have the same gauge, that every man builds his own road upon which another man's engine cannot run either with speed or safety. This fickleness, this disposition to shift about from one occupation to another, seems to be peculiar to American life, so much so that when a young man meets a friend who he has not seen for some time, the commonest question to ask is, "What are you doing now?" showing the improbability or uncertainty that he is doing today what he was doing when they last met. Some people think that if they keep everlastingly at it, they will succeed. But this is not always so. Working without a plan is as foolish as going to sea without a compass. A ship which has broken its rudder in mid-ocean may keep everlastingly at it, may keep on a full head of steam, driving about all the time, but it never arrives anywhere. It never reaches any port unless by accident, and if it does find a haven, its cargo may not be suited to the people, the climate, or conditions. The ship must be directed to a definite port for which its cargo is adapted, and where there is a demand for it, and it must aim steadily for that port through sunshine and storm, through tempest and fog. So a man who would succeed must not drift about rudderless on the ocean of life. He must not only steer straight toward his destined port when the ocean is smooth, when the currents and winds serve, but he must keep his course in the very teeth of the wind and the tempest, and even when enveloped in the fogs of disappointment and mists of opposition. Atlantic liners do not stop for fogs or storms. They plough straight through the rough seas with only one thing in view, their destined port, and no matter what the weather is, no matter what obstacles they encounter, their arrival in port can be predicted to within a few hours. On the prairies of South America there grows a flower that always inclines in the same direction. If a traveller loses his way and has neither compass nor chart, by turning to this flower he will find a guide on which he can implicitly rely, for no matter how the rains descend or the winds blow, its leaves point to the north. So there are many men whose purposes are so well known, whose aims are so constant, that no matter what difficulties they may encounter or what opposition they may meet, you can tell almost to a certainty where they will come out. They may be delayed by headwinds and counter-currents, but they will always head for the port and will steer straight towards the harbour. You know to a certainty that whatever else they may lose, they will not lose their compass or rudder. Whatever may happen to a man of this stamp, even though his sails may be swept away and his mast stripped to the deck, though he may not be wrecked by the storms of life, the needle of his compass will still point to the North Star of his hope. Whatever comes, his life will not be purposeless. Even a wreck that makes its port is a greater success than a full-rigged ship, with all its sails flying, with every mast and every rope intact, which merely drifts along into an accidental harbour. To fix a wandering life and give it direction is not an easy task, but a life which has no definite aim is sure to be frittered away in empty and purposeless dreams. Listless triflers, busy idlers, purposeless busybodies are seen everywhere. A healthy, definite purpose is a remedy for 1,000 ills which attend aimless lives. Discontent and dissatisfaction flee before a definite purpose. What we do begrudgingly without a purpose becomes a delight with one, and no work is well done nor healthily done which is not enthusiastically done. Mere energy is not enough. It must be concentrated on some steady, unwavering aim. What is more common than unsuccessful geniuses or failures with commanding talents? Indeed, the term unrewarded genius has become a proverb. Every town has unsuccessful, educated and talented men. But education is of no value, talent is worthless, unless it can do something, achieve something. Men who can do something at everything and a very little at anything are not wanted in this age. What this age wants is young men and women who can do one thing without losing their identity or individuality, or becoming narrow, cramped, or dwarfed. Nothing can take the place of an all-absorbing purpose. Education cannot, genius cannot, talent cannot, industry cannot, willpower cannot. The purposeless life must ever be a failure. What good are powers, faculties, unless we can use them for a purpose? What good would a chest of tools do a carpenter, unless he could use them? A college education, a head full of knowledge, are worth little to the men who cannot use them to some definite end. The man without a purpose never leaves his mark upon the world. He has no individuality. He is absorbed in the mass, lost in the crowd, weak, wavering, and incompetent. "Consider, my lord," said Rowland Hill to the Prime Minister of England, "that a letter to Ireland and the answer back would cost thousands upon thousands of my affectionate countrymen more than 1/5 of their week's wages. If you shut the post office to them, which you do now, you shut out warm hearts and generous affections from home, kindred, and friends." The lad learned that it cost to carry a letter from London to Edinburgh 404 miles, 1/18th of a cent, while the government charged for a simple folded sheet of paper 28 cents, and twice as much if there was the smallest enclosure. Against the opposition and contempt of the post office department, he at length carried his point, and on January 10th, 1840, penny postage was established throughout Great Britain. Mr. Hill was chosen to introduce the system at a salary of £1,500 a year. His success was most encouraging, but at the end of 2 years, a Tory minister dismissed him without paying for his services as agreed. The public was indignant, and at once contributed $65,000, and, at the request of Queen Victoria, Parliament voted him $100,000 cash, together with $10,000 a year for life. It is a great purpose which gives meaning to life. It unifies all our powers, binds them together in one cable, and makes strong and united what was weak, separated, scattered. Smatterers are weak and superficial. Of what use is a man who knows a little of everything and not much of anything? It is the momentum of constantly repeated acts that tells the story. Let thine eyes look straight before thee, ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand nor to the left. one great secret of St. Paul's power lay in his strong purpose. Nothing could daunt, nothing intimidate him. The Roman emperor could not muzzle him. The dungeon could not appall him. No prison suppress him. Obstacles could not discourage him. "This one thing I do" was written all over his work. The quenchless zeal of his mighty purpose burned its way down through the centuries, and its contagion will never cease to fire the hearts of men. "Try and come home, somebody," said his mother to Gambetta, as she sent him off to Paris to school. Poverty pinched this lad hard in his little garret study, and his clothes were shabby. But what of that? He had made up his mind to get on in the world. For years he was chained to his desk and worked like a hero. At last his opportunity came. Jules Favre was to plead a great cause on a certain day, but, being ill, he chose this young man, absolutely unknown, rough and uncouth, to take his place. For many years Gambetta had been preparing for such an opportunity, and he was equal to it. He made one of the greatest speeches that up to that time had ever been made in France. That night all the papers in Paris were sounding the praises of this ragged, uncouth Bohemian, and soon all France recognized him as the Republican leader. This sudden rise was not due to luck or accident. He had been steadfastly working and fighting his way up against oppositions and poverty for just such an occasion. Had he not been equal to it, it would only have made him ridiculous. What a stride! Yesterday, poor and unknown, living in a garret. Today, deputy-elect in the city of Marseille, and the great Republican leader. When Louis Napoleon had been defeated at Sedan, and had delivered his sword to William of Prussia, and when the Prussian army was marching on Paris, the brave Gambetta went out of this besieged city in a balloon barely grazed by the Prussian guns, landed in Amiens, and by almost superhuman skill raised 3 armies of 800,000 men, provided for their maintenance, and directed their military operations. A German officer said, "This colossal energy is the most remarkable event of modern history, and will carry down Gambetta's name to remote posterity." This youth, who was poring over his books in an attic while other youths were promenading the Champs-Élysées, although but 32 years old, was now virtually dictator of France, and the greatest orator in the Republic. What a striking example of the great reserve of personal power, which, even in dissolute lives, is sometimes called out by a great emergency or sudden sorrow, and ever after leads the life to victory. When Gambetta found that his first speech had electrified all France, his great reserve rushed to the front. He was suddenly weaned from dissipation, and resolved to make his mark in the world. Nor did he lose his head in his quick leap into fame. He still lived in the upper room in the musty Latin Quarter, and remained a poor man without stain of dishonor, though he might easily have made himself a millionaire. When he died, the Figaro said, "The Republic has lost its greatest man." American boys should study this great man, for he loved our country and took our Republic as the pattern for France. There is no grander sight in the world than that of a young man fired with a great purpose, dominated by one unwavering aim. He is bound to win. The world stands to one side and lets him pass. It always makes way for the man with a will in him. He does not have one half the opposition to overcome that the undecided, purposeless man has, who, like driftwood, runs against all sorts of snags to which he must yield simply because he has no momentum to force them out of his way. What a sublime spectacle it is to see a youth going straight to his goal, cutting his way through difficulties and surmounting obstacles which dishearten others, as though they were but stepping stones. Defeat, like a gymnasium, only gives him new power. Opposition only doubles his exertions. Dangers only increase his courage. No matter what comes to him, sickness, poverty, disaster, he never turns his eye from his goal. Duas qui sequitur lepores neutrum capit. End of chapter 39. One Unwavering Aim.